Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for giving us the time today to speak about our strategy recommendations for Smith & Wesson Brands, Inc. I am Colleen Shaw, and my group members Kyle Gershon and Joseph Blaylock will be presenting with me today. And my other group members that are not present for today's presentation are Derek Bowie, Mackenzie Gibson, Nisa Mirza, and Terrence Crenshaw. So an agenda about what we will be discussing today is a new mission and vision statement, a SWOT analysis, near-term and long-term action plans that Smith & Wesson should take, a financial forecast, and a conclusion wrapping up everything that we discussed today. And I'm going to pass it off to Kyle Gershon as he presents what Smith & Wesson's new mission and vision statement should be.
In order for Smith & Wesson to be effective in today's changing political and legal climate, we think that it's best for them to update their vision and mission statement. Our updated mission statement for Smith & Wesson is to empower our customers to protect and defend themselves and their loved ones by providing innovative, reliable, and high-quality firearms while also fostering a culture of safety, responsibility, and education in the firearms community. We believe this is the best mission statement because it emphasizes the company's commitment to its customers and their needs while also highlighting the importance of responsible firearms ownership and education. Our updated vision statement for Smith & Wesson is by the end of 2028, we will be recognized as the premium brand in the firearms industry, provide protection and defense options for the entire firearms community, and promote firearms safety and responsibility. The proposed vision statement clearly aligns with the long-term strategic direction of S&W and specifically with our long-term action plan for the company. S&W is an iconic brand and it should capitalize on the position as such. At the same time, it should be a provider to all firearm enthusiasts and not just those that can afford a premium brand.
When speaking about the strengths of Smith & Wesson, brand recognition is first and foremost. With over a century providing high-quality firearms to civilians and law enforcement in the United States, Smith & Wesson is a name that is synonymous with high-quality handguns and ammunition. Next is their flexible manufacturing model. With a high degree of competency in the field of metal injection molding and their vertical integration into the steel industry, they have managed to create a competitive advantage over their competitors. This advantage has allowed them to maintain a high degree of quality control over their steel parts for their products, while also reducing the costs for the production of those products. This competitive advantage is one of the reasons behind their financial performance, but we will get into that in more detail later. Another strength is their diversification of client base, as well as their distribution channels. Smith & Wesson has over 100 years of providing high-quality firearms to civilians in the United States, but they also have a history of providing high-quality and innovative firearms and ammunition for law enforcement. As for distribution channels, Smith & Wesson predominantly distributes through independent FFL dealers, but also distributes through such large sporting chains such as Academy and Bass Pro Shop. Despite these strengths, Smith & Wesson also has weaknesses. The most prominent of these presently being disruptions due to their relocation from their ancestral home in Massachusetts to Tennessee. This move, like all change initiatives in business, have led to disruptions which could further hinder Smith & Wesson going forward. However, this move also gives Smith & Wesson an opportunity to go in a new direction. The next issue that Smith & Wesson is facing is one that many firearms manufacturers have been facing, that being of excess inventory. This has resulted from the record high firearm sales following the COVID-19 pandemic and the ensuing political turmoil that came about after the George Floyd shooting. This began as a benefit. As this demand began to wane and fall back to pre-COVID norms, this increase in inventory became an issue. While firearms do not face the same issues of obsolescence as in the tech industry, the increased holding cost of the product is a detriment and a danger if Smith & Wesson cannot move the product. The next major issue is Smith & Wesson's lack in research and development. While they have a great history of innovation within the firearms industry, that has become less so in recent years. While the Smith & Wesson M&P has maintained a top 5 ranking in use among law enforcement agencies, it has fallen behind their competitors in Glock and Sig Sauer due to their continual focus on innovation in their firearms. Moving on to opportunities for Smith & Wesson, the first among these is the acquisition of smaller competitors. As discussed previously, while the M&P has managed to maintain its position in the top 5 ranking, it has fallen behind Glock and Sig Sauer due to their increase in innovation, as well as Glock's high capacity for modification. Because of this, and their recent move of headquarters, We believe this is an opportunity for Smith & Wesson to acquire smaller competitors. Presently, Smith & Wesson sells firearms and ammunition, though if you look at their product line, they predominantly sell handguns. However, when you look into accessories and merchandise, there are no Smith & Wesson accessories available, and as far as merchandise, the entirety of it is produced through third-party licenses. We believe that in acquiring some of these manufacturers, Smith & Wesson has an opportunity to capitalize on its competitive advantage and its economy of scale, as well as its core competencies in metal injection molding to better compete against their competitors. Moving on to the next opportunity. While the ongoing conflict between Ukraine and Russia is unfortunate, it does offer an opportunity for Smith & Wesson. Military contracts are some of the most lucrative contracts in the world in the firearm industry. Next are the threats facing Smith & Wesson, that being the volatility of the firearms industry. Due to the political nature of the topic of firearms, the industry is incredibly volatile. This volatility takes place not just in demand, but in regulatory actions taken against firearms manufacturer, such as what happened in Massachusetts. Another threat facing Smith & Wesson is the increased competition in the low end of the market. As new firearms manufacturers and accessory manufacturers are entering the market, they're exemplifying Smith & Wesson's history of innovation. This innovation, however, is one of the greatest dangers facing Smith & Wesson. With their lack of research and development and their lack of innovation and their lack of diversification in their product line, these smaller competitors, while they may not be able to compete with Smith & Wesson in an economy of scale, the bulk of them together chew away at the market share. The last threat is one that all industries are facing, that of record inflation. This inflation not only greatly increases the cost of production for Smith & Wesson, but can influence the demand in the market for their products.
We propose 4 short-term changes for Smith & Wesson to improve its competitive position. The first one is to minimize disruptions from relocation. Smith & Wesson is currently in the process of relocating its headquarters to Maryville, Tennessee from Springfield, Massachusetts, and it is expected to be done in Q2 2024. And until this is done, they cannot function optimally due to carrying excess inventory and being understaffed due to employee relocations. And our primary end goal is to have this move completed successfully. And minimizing these impacts through Q2 2024 will have a material impact on Smith & Wesson. And our specific recommendations are to take these actions now instead of waiting and ramping up hiring to fill these positions, and therefore it will make G&A expenses increase from the decrease in the prior periods. Our second near-term recommendation is to reduce inventory. Smith & Wesson currently has excess inventory both for their own inventory and their distribution channels. Inventory reduction is already underway. However, they expect to hold some of this inventory until their move to Tennessee is complete. We believe that Smith & Wesson is underestimating the risks of excess inventory and should act aggressively to reduce the inventory in their channels. There will be some drawdown of excess inventory until the move to Tennessee is complete. We propose continued reductions to a place at or slightly below historical levels of $100 million to $120 million when accounting for the spinoff in 2020. This will generate additional cash flow that can be used for our future recommendations and will increase profitability due to lower carrying costs, in addition to making room for new, more profitable product lines. Our next recommendation is to make an acquisition in the low end of the firearms market. Firearms market is becoming a 2-tier market. Smith & Wesson is a premium brand and is thus a better fit for high-end consumers. We do not wish to dilute the Smith & Wesson brand by offering cheap products to appeal to the low-end market. Thus, a separate brand makes sense, and we recommend by growing acquisition in the low-end segments. High Point Firearms targets the low end of the firearms market. Their annual sales are $5 to $10 million. Given price-to-sales ratios of gun manufacturers, we believe we can acquire High Point for one-time sales plus a 20% premium. This gives us a cost of $9 million. Smith & Wesson's strengths in manufacturing should generate gross margins for High Point similar to other Smith & Wesson products. If we achieve a 33% gross margin, this gives us a payback period of 3 years. The cash is readily available and will not materially affect our balance sheet. We expect to close the acquisition before fiscal year 2024, which adds $7.5 million of revenue to fiscal year 2024 and beyond. Our final near-term recommendation is to hedge raw material costs. The initial impact on Smith & Wesson of the current inflationary environment was muted. However, inflation is beginning to affect their business more significantly. Since they manufacture many components, the areas in which they have the least amount of control is the cost of raw materials. We recommend they allocate $5 million to a temporary program to hedge inflation in raw materials for the next 12 months. The cash is available, and an inflation hedge reduces risk and allows Smith & Wesson to smooth the effects of inflation. The financial impact is up to $5 million in expense over the next 12 months if inflation comes down. However, given the current rates of PPI inflation, we expect this $5 million to reduce our cost of goods sold, which increases our gross margins. And now we will discuss our long-term recommendations. So Smith & Wesson should position themselves as a premium brand. Currently, Smith & Wesson tries to appeal to everyone. However, it is difficult to be both a low-cost provider and a premium brand. The Smith & Wesson brand needs to stand for one or the other. Given the strengths of Smith & Wesson's brand, the premium market makes the most sense. Thus, we recommend increasing R&D expenses as innovations are needed to maintain Smith & Wesson's status as a top brand. We recommend a gradual increase in R&D beginning in fiscal year 2024, starting with a 6% increase and ramping up by fiscal year 2027 to a point that annual R&D increases match annual sales increases. Also, with multiple new brands due to acquisition, Smith & Wesson will need to increase marketing expenses beginning in fiscal year 2024 at a similar scale due to R&D increases. Moving on to our next recommendation, to address the low end of the market without diluting the Smith & Wesson brand, we propose one acquisition per year beginning in fiscal year 2024 and continuing through fiscal year 2027. We would expect these acquisitions to be similar to the High Point acquisition discussed earlier. If each acquisition adds on average 1 to 1.5% growth to Smith & Wesson's top line, that is a substantial increase purely by acquisition. Then, by utilizing Smith & Wesson's internal manufacturing, gross margins are likely to increase as the acquisitions and to scale, and also as Smith & Wesson integrates them fully into their operations. For our final long-term recommendation, we want to partner with a retail store to host Smith & Wesson pop-up stores. Cabela's is the most logical choice because it is a high-end sporting goods store, and we want to grow the image of Smith & Wesson as a high-end premium brand. The objective is to promote Smith & Wesson by having a representative to answer questions and allow customers to hold the guns before purchase. Similar pop-up stores cost about $100,000. Our recommendation is to test this concept at 2 stores in fiscal year 2024, which, if successful, would then roll out to other stores in fiscal year 2025 to 2027. We believe the Cabela's partnership will add 0.5% to revenue in fiscal year 2025, 1% in fiscal year 2026, and 1.5% in fiscal year 2027. These estimates are based on similar pop-up stores. Now we are going to talk about the financial impacts of our recommendations. To the left is the baseline forecast, and to the right is the forecast based on our implemented recommendations. Baseline assumes 3 to 4% over pre-pandemic growth per Smith & Wesson management on their earnings call and continuing at the same rate. Note that we are not counting revenue from American Outdoor Products in our projections. With our recommendations, we expect much better financial results compared to a stay-the-course scenario. Specifically, increases in revenue spurred by acquisitions are roughly 1% per year, in addition to 0.5% from pop-up stores in fiscal year 2025, 1% in fiscal year 2026, and 1.5% in fiscal year 2027. Although our short-term changes do cause some minor fluctuations in fiscal year 2023, by fiscal year 2024, we are already over $7 million ahead of the baseline, and by fiscal year 2027, we are over $60 million net annually compared to the baseline, with a cumulative 5-year net increase of over $125 million. In summary, you can see that in the long term, the impacts of our recommendations become clear, with top and bottom line growth, along with significant increases in both gross and net margins. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to present our recommendations to you. Smith & Wesson is performing well, but we believe there is room for improvement by focusing short term on things like inventory reduction and longer term on strategic brand positioning. Our recommendations will lead to significant top and bottom line improvements over baseline. Thank you.